The Confederacy of Independent Systems was evil, but the Separatists were right. Their movement was co-opted by the Sith and turned into controlled opposition for the soon-to-be Empire. But at its core was a fundamental observation that was ahead of its time, that the Republic had become an empire and that its control was tyrannical across much of the galaxy. As reward for their foresight, the Separatists were screwed hard by history, first crushed by the Republic and Empire, and then sidelined by the Rebels and New Republic. Due to their co-option by the Sith, the Separatists were demonized in narratives of galactic history on both sides of the Galactic Civil War, even though they had been fighting for many of the same things that the Rebels later did. In this video, we'll be exploring this tragic paradox and what it says about the galaxy's heroes.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
The Empire hated the Separatists. That was to be expected. After all, the Empire was just the Republic without the mask it had worn during the Clone Wars. It was what the Separatists had claimed to be fighting against. The CIS and the Separatist holdouts that persisted after the end of the war were the antithesis of everything the Empire claimed to stand for, and the Empire demonized them for it, just as the Republic had done during and before the Clone Wars. The Separatists called for decentralization and an end to the pillaging of the Outer Rim for the benefit of the core worlds, and for that they were anathema to the Republic and Empire. But the Rebel Alliance didn't care much for the Separatists either. Despite fighting against many of the same things the Seps had, the Rebels went to great lengths to distance themselves from the CIS. They were the alliance to restore the Republic, not secessionists, founded and led by former Republic senators. By necessity, they had to work with Separatist holdouts and allow some into their ranks, but for a rebellion that was constantly in need of personnel, they were remarkably reluctant to allow Separatists or even former Separatists into their ranks. To quote the Essential Guide to Warfare, Mon Mothma, Bail Organa, and Garm Bel Iblis differed sharply about what role, if any, former Separatists should play in the rebellion. Bel Iblis argued that Separatists who hadn't committed war crimes should be accepted, noting that the Alliance had found a place for groups that sought their own region's independence, a goal that would have been called separatism just a few years before. Organa disagreed, contending that all Alliance members must accept that the Rebels' first and foremost goal was the Republic's restoration. Mothma acknowledged Bel Iblis's point. After all, she'd joined Padme Amidala's calls for peace talks with the Separatist leadership, but worried that accepting Separatists would play into the hands of Imperial propagandists, drying up sympathy and support for the Alliance. A few Separatist holdouts did eventually join the Alliance after publicly disavowing their pasts. The CIS General Horn Amberjean became the leader of the BRICS Freedom Fighters, while Blox Hatha, an Nemoidian captain in the Trade Defense Force, was refused formal membership in the Alliance, but became a renowned privateer bearing a rebel letter of marque. Many former Separatists, even those who hadn't committed war crimes, were refused entry into the Alliance, and in some sectors, the Galactic Civil War was a three-way fight between Imperials, Rebels, and Separatists. This is especially remarkable considering how eager the Rebels were to accept former Imperials, who made up the bulk of the Alliance forces' top ranks. As the Essential Guide passage suggested, there was more to this than Alliance leadership just snubbing the Seps. The Alliance to restore the Republic was ultimately a pro-Republic organization, and while it acknowledged the Republic's problems, it refused to accept separatism as the answer to them. But beyond that, the Rebels were wary of playing into Imperial propaganda lines. The Empire built support for its rule on the memory of the Clone Wars, making the Separatists into a boogeyman to scare loyalists the galaxy over back into line. It didn't help that during the war itself, the Confederacy had been specifically tasked with building this rhetorical line. After all, Count Dooku, General Grievous, and all the rest got their marching orders from Darth Sidious, who specifically tasked them with spreading terror with the purpose of making people associate separatism with war crimes. The many atrocities of General Grievous, the resource exploitation of the separatist megacorporations, and the terror tactics the Confederacy employed, all throughout the war, irreversibly poisoned the name Separatist in the eyes of most people, just as they were supposed to. As we discussed in the past, the political and corporate factions of the CIS were not natural allies. While many corporate factions supported the separatist cause as a means of escaping Republic regulations, most civilian separatists wanted to secede specifically to escape those kinds of corporate exploiters, many of whom funneled the resources and credits of the Rim coreward, with the full backing of the Republic. Count Dooku and the Sith knit the two sides together and then used the crimes of the corporations to paint all other separatists as soulless exploiters. The Empire capitalized on this all throughout its reign. The Emperor's speeches would always describe any faction or system that opposed the Empire in any way as separatist, and the Empire's official name for the planets that had declared allegiance to the Rebel Alliance was the Seceded Worlds. This wasn't actually the case. Mon Mothma unilaterally refused to set up a full opposing government to the Empire like the CIS had, not only to avoid separatist comparisons, but also because she believed it would be recognizing the Empire as legitimate when it wasn't. But that didn't stop the Empire from painting her and everyone who followed her as the second coming of General Grievous, and it was only when a generation that didn't remember the Clone Wars came of age that this rhetoric stopped working. Even then, the Rebel Alliance maintained a distance from the Separatists, adhering to the Imperial Party line of the CIS as an evil, destructive force, and accepting former Imperials more readily than former Separatists. The New Republic also did nothing to correct the record, keeping the Imperial narrative of the Clone Wars in the history books, despite the fact that most of what the Separatists had been fighting for was a common cause with the Rebel Alliance. Consider what the Separatists, the real Separatists, were fighting for. They saw the Republic as a tyrannical empire that had exploited the galaxy for centuries, and they simply wanted independence from it. They decried the corruption of the Senate and claimed that the Republic was headed towards openly being an empire. And they were right. Everything they predicted about the Republic happened, and many of their criticisms of it and the empire that followed were sound and acknowledged by the Rebel Alliance. Again, it's important to emphasize that the Alliance was the alliance to restore the Republic. It fundamentally believed that the Republic had been better, or at least salvageable, before the Empire, and there's an irreconcilable difference between them and the Separatists there. The Alliance wasn't on the right side of that debate, we'd argue. They were just looking to roll back the clock on the Empire, when the reality was that it had a long history within the Republic, going all the way back to the Alsacan conflicts. But even the Alliance accepted independence movements now and again, so why was that difference such a sticking point? Put simply, the Separatists were right in the wrong way at the wrong time. The real threat that the Separatist movement posed to the Republic is that it forced loyalists to consider whether it deserved to exist after all it had done wrong, and it forced the Republic to confront some of the fundamental evils it had embodied for thousands of years. Loyalists responded to these uncomfortable truths with either rabid calls for the violent suppression of those spreading them, or with denial. The former group of loyalists became the Empire. The denialists became the leaders of the Rebel Alliance. The ideological confrontations the Separatists had forced the Republic into were uncomfortable, and that discomfort remained in the minds of the surviving loyalists. The only one who was willing to accept that the Seps had a point was Garm Bel Iblis, who had been neutral during the Clone Wars. Mon Mothma and Bail Organa remained stubborn in the Apologia for the Republic. In both legends and canon, the result was a deeply flawed New Republic that, while a dramatic improvement over the Old Republic, retained many of the same flaws. So, that's the tragedy of the Separatist movement. Even when history proved them right, they were reviled, and their face in the history books was General Grievous's death mask. But what do you think? Do you agree that the Separatists had a point, or do you side more with Bail Organa? Feel free to post your thoughts in the comment section below.